welcome to the deep dive. You, our listener, asked us to look beyond the headlines on those recent U.S. airstrikes in Iran. So today, that's what we're doing. We've got sources that, well, they paint really different pictures of the actual impact. Our mission here is to try and cut through some of that noise and get to the heart of what really happened with those strikes, the ones on the Iranian nuclear facilities.
Yeah, and what's striking, I think, is how quickly these contrasting narratives pop up around major global events. These sources we have, they give you a pretty unique chance to compare a preliminary intelligence assessment side by side with the public claims. So it's not just about what happened, but also how it was, spun or presented. We'll lay out the details so you can kind of see the full picture.
Okay, let's dive right in there. Our main source here is this preliminary Pentagon intelligence assessment about the strikes. Now, this kind of assessment usually pulls together lots of different intel, satellite pictures, maybe intercepted comms, human sources, that sort of thing. And it focused on 3 specific Iranian nuclear sites: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The big question for us, obviously, is what did they actually achieve? What was the result?
Well, the Pentagon's findings, according to this assessment, are quite specific. They're saying the strikes did not destroy Iran's nuclear program. Not at all. Instead, the intel suggests the program was only set back, maybe by just a few months. Some estimates we saw were even saying less than 6 months.
Less than 6 months. So it was more like a delay, a temporary setback, rather than, destruction. That really begs a crucial question, doesn't it? Like, what exactly was left standing? How limited was the impact on the ground?
Precisely. That's the key point. While the strikes reportedly did do significant damage to the facilities themselves, the assessment says they failed to penetrate deeply enough. They didn't destroy the core underground parts of Iran's nuclear program, so the main underground structures. They were basically intact, even though, interestingly, the entrances to the sites were sealed off. But Iran could potentially get back in and restart things after repairs.
Right. And what about the actual nuclear material we hear so much talk about? Enriched uranium, the centrifuges. What happened there?
That's another critical piece. The assessment points out that a substantial amount of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, it seems it was moved before the strikes happened. So very little of the actual nuclear material was destroyed. And maybe even more importantly, the centrifuges, the machines they need for enrichment, they were reportedly mostly unharmed. Even the really powerful bombs they used, the GBU-57s, the bunker busters. Well, the assessment says even those weren't able to reach the deepest, most protected parts of these facilities. It just shows how difficult it is to really target Iran's most hardened nuclear infrastructure.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting because the story just splits completely. We see a direct, very public challenge to these intelligence findings.
Indeed. Yeah, the Pentagon's assessment, it stands in really stark contrast to the claims coming from the Trump administration at the time. President Trump himself and also Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, they publicly disputed what the Pentagon was finding.
That's quite a clash, a really powerful counter-narrative. Can you walk us through exactly what they were saying? How did their claims stack up against the assessment?
Well, they used words like obliterated.
Yeah.
They insisted the strikes obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities. They called the mission a total success. The White House press secretary even went so far as calling the intelligence assessment flat out wrong and suggested, maybe it was leaked deliberately to undermine the administration.
Wow.
So you end up with this fascinating direct contradiction you have. The Pentagon and the intel assessment saying, okay, strikes delayed the program by months only. The underground stuff wasn't destroyed. Uranium and centrifuges mostly okay. And then on the other hand, the Trump administration's public statements claiming obliteration, total destruction, saying they decimated Iran's ability to make weapons.
So for you, our listener, you're really left looking at 2 profoundly different versions of what happens, quite stark. If the intelligence community is saying, look, minimal destruction, but the public statements are claiming obliteration, how do our sources help us figure out why there's such a big gap? What does this mean in the bigger picture?
It really highlights how different ways of measuring success can shake things, doesn't it? You've got the political definition versus the intelligence assessment definition. And that difference can seriously affect public understanding, maybe even future policy decisions. The U.S. military and the intelligence agencies, they're always reassessing, right? The assessment of the full impact continues, and more information could always come out later. It's also really important to remember the operation itself was described as being intentionally limited. The Pentagon made a point of emphasizing that the U.S. doesn't seek war with Iran. That helps clarify the, let's say, intended scope of the action, even if the public claims painted a much bigger picture.
Right. So there you have it. That's our deep dive into these recent U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. What we've really unpacked here is this sharp contrast, this divergence between a preliminary intelligence assessment suggesting, just a temporary setback, and these public statements claiming complete destruction.
Yeah, this whole situation just underscores how critical it is to really scrutinize information,
Yeah.
especially when official sources are giving you such conflicting stories about major world events.
Absolutely. And for you, our listener, hopefully this gives you a perspective that goes a bit deeper than just the headlines. It lets you grasp some of the complexities, the nuances in these kinds of geopolitical situations.
And it brings up, I think, an important question for you to think about based on what we've discussed today. When you have intelligence reports saying one thing and public narratives painting a completely different picture, like with these airstrikes, how do you navigate that? How do you try to figure out what actually happened? What does success or impact even mean when the story itself seems to change depending on who's telling it? And, how does that ultimately shape your own view of these global events?